In this lesson, we are going to start setting up our rocket trails by running an additional PopSim that sources our original particle simulation. So I'm going to start off by dropping down New Geometry Object. I'm going to call this Rocket Volume Trails. And let's dive inside. Kill the file stop. I'm just going to hide other objects for right now. So put down Object Merge so we can get our original pops points. Do into this object. Go to our pops launch points and get pops points. And call this pops points. So the first thing we're going to want is to put down a time blend node. And the reason for this is that we want to make sure that we get data in between each frame, so we get good data interpolation, and that will make sure that our sim doesn't look steppy when we do the second pop sim in just a moment. I'm also going to want to put down a null, and I'm going to name this null NPT. And the reason for this is that I'm going to want to source the number of points on any given frame inside my simulation, so I'm only birthing off of those points. So on frame 169, there's 41 points, so the simulation will know just to birth off of those 41 points. And then finally, I'm going to put down a attribute SOP. I'm going to kill all the attributes that are currently on here, because we're not going to need them, except for color, because we do want to still kill these points when they hit the ground plane right here. So I'll keep color on there. I'll call this del adders. There's also some detail attributes on here, so I'm going to delete those as well. And finally, to keep this all clean, we'll also drop down a group node. I'm going to use this to delete any groups that might be on your points. So delete groups. So now that we have that set up, let's drop down our pop network. Use the new Houdini 13 PopNet. And let's go inside. Make sure we're on frame 1. So first thing we want to do is that we are birthing off points. So we'll set this to points. Come over to the birth tab. We're going to use impulse activation this time. So we're going to turn constant activation off. And for the impulse count, I'm going to use that null that we made earlier to get the number of points that we're going to want to birth here. So I'm going to use this expression, n_points, and that is going to get the number of points for a given object. And that object is going to be a relative reference to NPT. So I hit play right now, you can see that we're now birthing points off of our original simulation. Now there's a few other things we want to set up in here. Let's just go ahead and put a birth group on there. You never know if we'll need it. And I'm going to set the life expectancy down to 10. And the reason for this is that eventually we're going to want these trails to fade off. So this is going to give us a nice attribute we can use to control density. And finally, I'm going to turn interpolate source on to back. And that's going to give us a little bit more accurate birthing for our points. Finally, I want to come over to the Attributes tab and just make sure we're not using any velocity. So now we've got that, we want to actually start birthing points off of our original points. And to do that, we're going to use a pops replicate. Drop that down, and let's go inside. Again, we don't want to use constant activation for this, so I'm going to turn that off. I'm just going to do an impulse count of 1. So we only want to birth 1 point for each point. Hit play. You can see we're getting a lot more points now than we originally had. Now we're going to want the life expectancy of these points to be the same as whatever we're using for our source. What I'm going to do, I'm going to come up here and copy this parameter, and down in the life expectancy tab, I'm just going to link these up. So if you do have a reason to change them later, they'll all be linked up nicely. And also we want to kill the original particle. Now if you see right now, we're kind of getting these points birthing in a little clump. And the reason for that is that for the shape, it's using sphere. We just want the birth on the point. So we're going to change that to point, and now these points will stay birthing off of the original point. Now this isn't too interesting. These trails are really straight. So one thing we can do is we can add some noise. That's going to break up the trails a little bit. Give us a little bit more breakup in there. Let's increase our amplitude to 4. As you can see, now we're getting a little bit more noise in our birthing. It looks a little bit more interesting. Finally, we're going to want to put a little bit of velocity on here to give us a little bit of movement in our points. So I'm going to do add to inherited velocity. We're not going to actually use any inherited velocity. There isn't any anyways. And we're just going to add variance of 2 in all directions. And that's going to have our points kind of move nice and slowly, kind of like you would expect smoke to do. Now they're moving a little fast. If I play this in real time, you can see that. So we're going to want to put some air resistance on these points, and we can do that with just a simple pops drag node. And now if I play this, these points aren't going to move nearly as fast, and they're going to have a little bit more resistance, which is more natural and looks a little bit more like the smoke that we're going to be building off of these points later. So this should probably work. So I'm going to dive out of here. So one thing I want to do is, when these points are hitting the ground, you see that they're making this little section of red, and we don't want that. So I'm going to go ahead and drop down a delete SOP, and we're going to kill any points that are red. So $CR greater than 0.1, kill it. And now those are all gone. We'll just call this del red. And that should be all we need for this. So I'm going to go ahead and write this out. So like we've done before, put down the file node. We're going to name this, we'll call this trailed pops points. And we'll set the expression to what we've used before, $data / backticks $OS version 1 backticks $OS version 1 $F4. Want to make BGOs. We middle mouse that, we see that we're getting that correctly. We want to make that intermediate directory. Hit write file and play the whole thing, and that should give us all our points. So we hit read files, we have points that we can scrub through, and now we have the basis for our volume trail. So that is how we get the points we are going to source for our volume. In the next lesson, we will start using VBD volumes to build the trail.